Imagine this object. It's perfectly carved, feels, I don't know, strangely cold maybe, and it sort of shimmers with this internal light.
Mm-hmm.
It's a human skull, but made from flawless, clear crystal. And for, gosh, decades now, over a century really, this image has become this like universal symbol of mystery.
Oh, absolutely. Instantly recognizable.
Yeah, you see it in movies, adventure stories, all those, deep esoteric websites. You might picture like Aztec priests using it for some kind of dark magic.
Or maybe the Maya,
Yeah.
safeguarding this incredible ancient knowledge, maybe even, knowledge from somewhere else.
Exactly. It's just the ultimate icon of archaeological mystery, isn't it? It hints at ancient secrets, lost tech.
And for a lot of people, it just bypasses human history altogether. They go straight to Atlantis or, ETs.
Right. But here's the hook for this deep dive today, the real twist. What if these things, these skulls, claim to be like 3,600-year-old Mayan relics? What if they were actually just products? Products of a huge 19th century luxury goods trade made in like a German town known for jewelry, not ancient artifacts.
And that right there, that's the paradox we're diving into. It's why this story just won't go away.
So our mission today is to really unpack that tension. How can these things be scientifically proven fakes, like industrialized fakes?
And yet at the same time, be the bedrock for this massive, global, and constantly evolving belief system. It's fascinating.
Yeah. We've got a really interesting mix of sources for you today. Everything from, the hard science done in top labs
The forensic
to the actual historical paper trails that track where they really came from, which is, let's be honest, pretty mundane.
And then there's the anthropology, trying to figure out why the myth is still so powerful.
Okay, so let's start with the big one, the aha moment maybe for some of you listening. The single most sensational claim about the most famous crystal skulls that they're authentic pre-Columbian artifacts.
It's been completely, definitively, universally refuted by science. Like, end of story, scientifically speaking.
For every single one, they've managed to actually test properly.
Every single one made available for rigorous analysis, yeah.
Yeah.
They're hardstone carvings, sure, mostly quartz, but they're modern. The real story, the actual history, is how they got from some workshop, probably in Germany, to become these global spiritual icons. That's the journey we're tracing.
Okay, let's unpack this then. If we're saying the famous quartz skulls are fakes, we need a baseline. What did a real pre-Columbian skull artifact actually look like? What was the genuine context over there in Mesoamerica for the skull symbol?
Right, context is everything. And the skull motif, the calavera, it wasn't just like a minor thing. It was absolutely central in genuine pre-Columbian art, especially for the Aztecs and Maya.
Okay.
But, and this is key, it had a very specific meaning that gets twisted in modern interpretations. It wasn't just about death. It was about rebirth, cycles, feeding the sun god, that kind of thing.
Ah, okay. So cosmic significance, not just spooky.
Exactly. It was a serious, powerful symbol. But stylistically, and in terms of materials, it looked very different from the clear quartz skulls everyone knows.
Okay, so give us some examples. What materials were they actually using? What did they look like?
Well, they used what they had, right?
Yeah.
So you get these huge Aztec statues, monoliths, really, carved from volcanic rock, very imposing, very permanent.
Right.
For smaller things, more ritual objects, you see incredible detail. Skull masks made from mosaics, bits of obsidian, gorgeous jade, other stones fitted together. Intricate stuff.
So multiple pieces, often, not one big block of clear crystal.
Generally, yeah. Or if it was a single piece, it wasn't usually this kind of hyper-realistic, almost anatomical clear quartz style we see in the fakes.
Huh. So the famous ones, the ones you see in pictures that look almost like medical models, they already look kind of out of place compared to the real deal.
They really do. And another thing, the authentic use was often pretty brutal and, very direct. There was the Zompantli, the skull rack.
Oh, yeah, I've read about that grim stuff.
It is. They displayed the actual skulls of sacrificial victims publicly. And sometimes they carved representations of these racks in stone at major sites.
A source has mentioned a really famous one at Chichen Itza.
Oh, absolutely. Huge bas-relief wall there. Displays something like over 500 carved skulls. It's incredible and overwhelming.
Wow.
But again, look at the style. It fits perfectly with all the other Maya art there. If you put one of those clear, glassy, naturalistic quartz skulls next to that wall, it would look completely alien, like it dropped in from another planet or, another century.
So the sources are pretty blunt then. They say the famous quartz skulls have little stylistic or technical relationship with any genuine pre-Columbian depictions of skulls. It's an artistic mismatch.
It is. And that should have been the first clue, really. If something claims to be ancient but looks totally different from everything else from that time and place,
Yeah.
you got to ask, where did it actually come from?
Which brings us right to that symbolic power they have today, regardless of whether they're ancient or not. It's about the skull, and it's about the crucible.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, anthropologically speaking. The whole crystal skull thing works because it hits this perfect intersection of two really powerful but distinctly modern symbolic systems.
Okay, break that down. First, the skull form.
The skull itself, it's universal, right? Every culture recognizes it. It speaks to mortality, consciousness, the mind, the soul. It makes you think, forces you to confront your own existence, basically. Primal stuff.
Gotcha. And then the material, the quartz, rock crystal. This is where the New Age element kicks in, right?
Bingo. This material has been huge in modern metaphysical circles since, well, around the same time the fakes started showing up in the 19th century. Coincidence? Probably not.
Probably not.
Clear quartz especially gets described as like the most powerful healing crystal on the planet.
The belief centers around its structure, how it generates that little electrical charge when squeezed, the piezoelectric effect.
Right, I've heard of that.
And that effect is then claimed to amplify energy fields, boost meditation, that sort of thing. But the stories go way beyond just healing or good vibes, right? It gets almost technological.
Oh, yeah. The idea is that quartz can capture energy
Yeah.
and transmit it back easily, so it's perfect for psychic stuff.
Yeah.
And then you get the more extreme claims that they're basically computers.
Computers.
Made of crystal, like living libraries that can record energy, vibrations, the whole history of the world, ancient knowledge. Quartz, in this view, isn't just a pretty rock. It's like a cosmic hard drive.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this paradox right. The crystal skulls became this huge phenomenon not because they were genuinely ancient,
Nope.
but because some clever 19th century craftsperson fused this universal symbol of consciousness, the skull, with this very modern spiritual symbol of information storage and psychic power, the quartz crystal.
You nailed it. It was like a designer myth just waiting for a good story.
Yeah.
The quartz gives it the mystical, maybe even techie potential. The skull shape gives it the drama, the narrative hook.
Like a blank screen, perfectly made to reflect whatever people want to see in it.
Exactly. Ancient secrets, alien tech, spiritual enlightenment, you name it. It functions as an incredibly powerful artifact of belief, even though it's a completely fake artifact of history.
That makes a strange kind of sense. Okay, so if they aren't ancient and they don't look like the real Mesoamerican stuff, we need to follow the paper trail. Where did the most famous ones, the ones that really kicked this whole thing off, actually come from?
Right. The trail doesn't lead to some dusty crypt in the jungle.
Yeah.
It leads somewhere much more commercial, sophisticated 19th century Paris, specifically the antiquarian shops.
And the key player, the first big one, is the British Museum skull, the sort of type specimen.
That's the one.
Right.
Relatively small, clear quartz. The BM got it in 1898. And initially, they displayed it as genuine Aztec art. High-end stuff.
1898. And who did they get it from? Not some intrepid explorer.
Not quite. They bought it from Tiffany & Co. in New York, the famous luxury jeweler.
Tiffany's? Seriously? Seriously. Which immediately screams expensive commodity, right? Not archaeological find. That detail alone should have rung alarm bells, but somehow it got overlooked for ages.
Incredible. But the trail goes back even before Tiffany's to one specific guy in Paris.
One crucial figure, Eugene Bourbon. French antiquarian, dealer. Skilled, but maybe not entirely scrupulous.
Okay.
The skull first pops up publicly in his Paris shop in 1881. He's the common link for the British Museum skull, and the similar one that ended up in Paris. Bourbon is basically the architect of this whole thing.
And there's this really damning detail about him trying to sell it somewhere first, somewhere they'd actually know better.
Oh, this is the absolute smoking gun for his deception. It's brilliant in a devious way. In 1885, a few years after showing it in Paris, he takes the exact same skull to Mexico City.
Okay.
And he offers it to the Museo Nacional de Mexico, the National Museum.
And what happened? Did they bite?
Not a chance. The experts there, the people who actually lived and breathed genuine pre-Columbian art and history, they took one look and basically laughed him out of the room. They rejected it.
Outright. Called it a modern fake. They knew their own culture's materials, techniques, styles. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with it.
Wait, that's amazing. The actual cultural experts in Mexico said nope, fraud. So how on earth did he manage to sell it later?
Simple. He just packed up his rejected fake and took it elsewhere. Moved his business and the skull over to the U.S. He sold it to Tiffany's, targeting what the sources call a wealthier and, at the time, more naive market in New York and London.
Wow. So he knew it was fake, got called out, and just found buyers who didn't know any better.
Precisely. It wasn't ignorance on his part. It was pure cynical business. He took a known fake and rebranded it as this exotic, high-value treasure for people who wouldn't know the difference.
And the British Museum eventually had to face the music on this.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Nowadays, the BM officially catalogs it not as Aztec, but as probably European 19th century AD. They even use it as an example of a 19th century fake. Quite the turnaround from prized relic to, well, teaching tool about forgery.
Right. Embarrassing, but necessary. And the sister skull. The one in Paris at the Musée du Quai Branly now. Same story, same source.
Identical origin.
Yeah.
Also came from Bourbon, sold to a French ethnographer named Alphonse Pinard. And for years, it was also accepted as genuine. Same batch, same style, same commercial hustle from Bourbon.
And the science caught up with that one too.
Yep. In 2008, the Paris Museum formally announced it was a 19th century fabrication. That was after analysis by the C2RMF, their big museum research center.
And what did they find? You mentioned tools earlier.
Exactly. They looked really closely at the surface and found telltale marks, grooves, little holes made by jewelry burrs and other modern tools. Things you'd find in a 19th century workshop, not an ancient Mayan one. We'll get into the specifics of that science later, but it nailed the time frame.
Okay, so Bourbon skulls are like Generation 1 fakes from the 1880s, but then there's the Smithsonian skull. That one sounds like a sequel, a next-generation forgery.
That's a great way to put it. It really shows how the hoax evolved. The Smithsonian one is big, 30 pounds, milky quartz, pretty imposing. It turned up much later, donated anonymously in 1992.
Claimed to be Aztec, right. Bought in the 60s.
That was the story. But the science just demolished that claim.
But this is where the abrasives come in, the stuff they use to polish it.
Exactly. Scientists looked for tiny bits of residue left on the surface, and they found traces of silicon carbide, also known as carborundum.
And carborundum is?
It's a modern synthetic abrasive. Super hard, great for grinding tough materials like quartz at high speed.
Okay, but how modern are we talking?
Here's the kicker. Silicon carbide was first made commercially in the 1890s, using this specific industrial process. But it didn't become cheap and widely used for large-scale polishing work until well into the 20th century. The consensus is really post-1950s for the kind of use seen on the Smithsonian skull.
So finding carborundum means it couldn't have been carved before the 1950s.
Absolutely impossible. Doesn't matter what the donor claimed about buying it in the 60s or being Aztec. The physical evidence puts it firmly in the mid-20th century or later.
That is definitive. Wow.
Right. So you see the progression? Bourbon skulls. 19th century fakes for that early colonial collector craze. Smithsonian skull. A third-generation fake made decades later specifically to cash in on the legends the first fakes had already created. The myth itself started generating demand for more fakes.
Let's go back to Bourbon for a second. He sounds like quite the character, inventing this whole career for himself.
He really was a product of his era. There was this huge explosion of interest in Mesoamerica after big sites were rediscovered. It created this crazy, unregulated market. Anything exotic and ancient could sell.
The sources call it the Wild West of artifact sales.
Pretty much. And Bourbon, who'd actually been an official archaeologist for Emperor Maximilian in Mexico for a bit.
Serious?
Yeah. He learned how to walk that line between selling genuine pieces and, as the sources put it, ingeniously confected ones. The fact he could take a skull rejected by Mexican experts and sell it to Tiffany's, that shows you his skill wasn't in archaeology, it was in salesmanship. He was selling a story.
Okay, but he was the middleman. Someone had to actually make these incredibly complex things. Where were they being physically produced? You need serious skill to carve quartz like that.
And that leads us to the final piece of the puzzle, the logical conclusion. Whereas the only place in the world at that time with the skills, the tech, and the specific raw materials. All signs point to the lapidary workshops in Eider Oberstein, Germany.
Eider Oberstein. Why there? Seems kind of random.
Not random at all. Eider Oberstein was, and still is, a world-famous center for cutting and carving gemstones and hardstones. They had centuries of experience working local agate. But by the 19th century, they were the global masters. And crucially, they'd adapted their skills to work with difficult imported materials, like quartz.
And what kind of quartz were they working with?
Large, high-quality blocks of imported Brazilian quartz, turning it into fancy decorative objects, jewelry, high-end stuff for the international market. Their whole town's economy was geared towards expert hardstone carving, using that specific material.
Wait a minute. Brazilian quartz? Didn't the scientific analysis later confirm the quartz was from Brazil?
Bingo. It all clicks together perfectly.
Right.
The science shows the quartz came from Brazil or maybe Madagascar, places way outside ancient Mesoamerican trade routes.
Okay.
The historical records show Idar Oberstein workshops were the main consumers of that exact imported Brazilian quartz.
Right.
And Bobon, the Paris dealer, is selling finished Aztec skulls made from it.
It's an open and shut case, basically.
It's inescapable. Bobon sourced his fakes from the one place that could make them. Idar Oberstein, Germany. History, commerce, geology, science, it all lines up. The ancient origin story just completely evaporates.
Okay, stepping back. That historical trail is, incredibly convincing. Bobin, Idar Oberstein, Tiffany's. It paints a clear picture. But just to be absolutely crystal clear, pardon the pun, for everyone listening,
Huh. Nice one.
what is the specific, hard scientific evidence that just leaves zero room for doubt? The stuff that proves 19th or 20th century origin? This is the core refutation, right?
Absolutely. And the scientific case is robust, coming from multiple angles. It really rests on three main pillars, and each one independently points to a modern origin. Tool marks, abrasives used, and the geological source of the quartz itself.
Let's start with the tool marks. You mentioned this earlier. This is like the forensic evidence, the final nail in the coffin for authenticity.
Pretty much, yeah. The most conclusive stuff comes from looking really, really closely at the surface using scanning electron microscopy, SM. It lets scientists see microscopic scratches left by the tools.
And what did Zepsham show on the big players? The British Museum, Paris, Smithsonian, even the Mitchell Hedges skull?
On all of them. Clear signs of modern industrial manufacturing. Specifically, these perfectly parallel and concentric striations, like tiny regular grooves
Yeah.
cut into the quartz. Not random scratches at all.
Parallel and concentric. Meaning what, exactly? What makes those marks?
It's the unmistakable signature of modern high-speed lapidary rotary wheels. Think dentist drill, but for stone. To cut those kinds of precise, deep, uniform grooves into quartz, which is really hard, remember, 7 on the Mohs scale,
Right.
you need a machine spinning very fast, with a lot of torque. Pre-Columbian cultures just didn't have anything like that. You cannot make those marks by hand.
But how do we know for sure? Couldn't they have had some super sophisticated lost hand technique?
That's where control groups come in. Scientists compared the skulls to artifacts known to be genuinely pre-Columbian, things like a Mixtec rock crystal cup, verified Aztec beads.
And what did they look like under the microscope?
Totally different. Their surfaces were shallow and irregular, lots of little pits and uneven scratches. Exactly what you'd expect from painstaking handworking, using simpler tools like maybe wooden sticks with sand or crushed garnet mixed with water as an abrasive.
So ancient hand polishing looks messy and irregular up close,
Relatively speaking, yeah.
while the famous skulls look like they came off a modern machine tool.
Precisely. The difference is stark. It proves modern machinery was involved, period.
Okay, that's powerful evidence. Pillar number 2, the abrasives. We touched on this with the Smithsonian skull and the carborundum.
Right. The tiny bits of grit left behind from the grinding and polishing process, they act like little timestamps.
Yeah.
For the 19th century skulls, like the BM and Paris ones, they found evidence of very hard abrasives like corundum or maybe even diamond dust.
Which was available in the 19th century.
Yes, consistent with advanced European workshop tech of that era. Still requires sophisticated processing, but not synthetic in the modern sense.
But the Smithsonian one, the big milky one, had the synthetic stuff. Remind us again.
Silicon carbide. Carborundum. And we really need to hammer this home. Silicon carbide is man-made. It's produced in a complex industrial process using electric furnaces, the Atchison process. It's a product of modern industry.
And the timeline for its widespread use.
That's the key. Invented in the 1890s, yes. But it didn't become commonly available and cheap enough for routine use on large items like that massive skull until the mid-20th century, probably post-1950s.
So finding it embedded in the skull means...
It had to be finished, polished, worked on after the 1950s. It's forensic proof. It completely nukes any claim of it being ancient Aztec.
Wow. Okay, pillar 3. This one sounds really cool. Fingerprinting the quartz itself, like asking the rock where it came from.
Exactly. It's brilliant science. They use techniques like X-ray crystallography and Raman spectroscopy. Basically, they analyze tiny imperfections trapped inside the crystal when it originally formed millions of years ago.
Now, imperfections like what? Air
Yeah.
bubbles.
Could be flue inclusions, tiny bubbles of liquid or gas, or solid inclusions, microscopic specks of other minerals that got trapped as the quartz grew. These inclusions are unique to the specific geological conditions where the crystal formed, like a fingerprint or DNA.
And what did the fingerprints reveal for the British Museum and Paris Skulls quartz?
The specific types of inclusions they found, especially minerals like iron chloride, pointed very strongly to the quartz having formed in geological environments typical of large deposits in Brazil or Madagascar.
Which brings us right back to Idar Oberstein and their suppliers.
Precisely. It connects perfectly. Those sources, Brazil especially, were completely outside the trade networks of ancient Mesoamerica. They didn't have access to that stuff.
Yep.
But those were the exact places the 19th century German workshops in Idar Oberstein were importing their raw quartz from.
So the science doesn't just say it's not old. It practically says this is a European fake made from Brazilian stone.
That's pretty much it. It closes the loop. You've got the modern tool marks, you've potentially got modern abrasives, and you've got raw material from the wrong continent for an ancient Mesoamerican origin, but the right continent for a 19th century German workshop. It's airtight.
And just quickly, you mentioned one other dating technique for the Paris skull.
Yeah, quartz hydration dating, QHD. It's a bit more experimental, but it measures a super thin layer that forms on the quartz surface over time as it reacts with moisture. The result showed the Paris skull was carved way later than a comparison artifact known to be from 1740. Placed it firmly in the 18th or, more likely, 19th century.
So across the board, microscopy, chemistry, geology, dating techniques, the science is unanimous. These are not ancient.
Not even close. Okay, so we've dealt with the museum skulls, proven fakes, 19th century commercial products, Bobon, Idar Oberstein. Case closed, right?
You'd think so. But the skull that really captured the public imagination, the one that became the superstar of the whole phenomenon, it wasn't one of the museum pieces.
Nope. It was a privately owned artifact. The Mitchell Hedges skull, often called the Skull of Doom.
This is the really famous one, right? The clear one, maybe slightly smaller than the BM skull, but it's got that separate jaw piece.
That's the one. Detachable mandible, visually very dramatic. And its origin story.
Yeah.
Oh boy. It's pure Hollywood pulp fiction, spun for decades by Anna Mitchell Hedges, the adoptive daughter of the owner.
Right. What was the official story she told?
She claimed she personally found it.
Yeah.
On her 17th birthday, no less, back in 1924. Buried under a collapsed altar inside a Mayan temple at this remote lost site called Lubantun in what was then British Honduras, now Belize.
I mean, you can just picture the movie scene, right?
Totally. It's the perfect discovery myth, Indiana Jones stuff.
And her father, F.A. Mitchell Hedges, he added the extra spice.
Oh, Frederick Albert Mitchell Hedges was a character and a half. A real-life adventurer type, writer, explorer. Loved the limelight. In his memoir, Danger My Ally, from 1954, he dials the mystery up to 11. He claims the skull is at least 3,600 years old. And get this. He says the Maya high priests used it to will death onto their enemies.
Seriously, will death.
Yep, that's where the name Skull of Doom comes from. Pure sensationalism, courtesy of dear old dad.
Wow. But hang on, there's a theory that even that whole dramatic discovery story wasn't original.
This is one of the wildest parts. Research suggests the entire narrative, finding the skull in a lost temple ruin, might have been directly inspired by, or even lifted from, a 1936 adventure novel.
A novel?
Yeah, by a guy named Jack McLaren. And the title of the novel, The Crystal Skull.
No way.
So the famous discovery story itself might just be fiction, borrowed from another piece of fiction.
Okay, that's wild. But here's where the story completely unravels, right? Because forget the jungle, forget the novel, there's actual paperwork, documents that show where it really came from.
This is where it gets really interesting, yeah. The documentary evidence just blows the Lubantun story out of the water. Irrefutable stuff.
So when did the skull actually first appear in public record? Not 1924 in Belize.
Nope. Years later, London, 1936 to be precise. It was written about in a very dry academic article in the British anthropological journal Man.
An academic journal. And who did the journal say owned it then?
It stated the skull was in the possession of Mr. Sidney Burney, a London art dealer.
An art dealer in London owned it in 1936.
Yeah. Which means 12 years after Anna supposedly found it in the jungle, it was just a piece of inventory in a London dealership. The article was by a British Museum anthropologist, G.M. Morant, who carefully compared this Burney skull to the BM's own skull, noting how similar they were in size and shape.
Okay, that's already pretty suspicious. But the absolute killer evidence, the smoking gun, is the auction record, right?
This is the definitive proof. Public record. Sotheby's Auction House, London, October 15th, 1943. Lot 54. Guess who bought the crystal skull being sold by Sidney Burney?
Let me guess. F.A. Mitchell Hedges.
Bingo. Purchased for £400 sterling. There's even note in the British Museum's files confirming the sale and the price. He didn't find it in a temple, he bought it at a London auction.
That just completely demolishes the entire Lubentone discovery myth. 40 years of that story, gone. So how did Anna Mitchell Hedges try to explain this away? She promoted the skull her whole life.
Yeah, she stuck to her guns, bless her heart, right up until she died in 2007. Her later explanation was that, oh, her father had only loaned the skull to Bernie, maybe as collateral for a loan or something, and he had to buy it back at the auction to get his property back.
Is there any evidence for that loan story?
Absolute zero. No documents, no letters, nothing. All the evidence suggests Bernie owned it and was trying to sell it for years. Jane McLaren Walsh, the Smithsonian anthropologist who studied it closely, basically concluded Anna just made the whole discovery story up.
So the Skull of Doom, just like the museum ones, is a fake, bought at auction, but it's often called a superior fake. What does that mean? Was it made better?
In a way, yes. It represents the absolute peak of the forger's craft for that era. Now, scientifically, SC analysis showed the exact same modern tool marks. High-speed, diamond-coated rotary burring and cutting tools. So made with modern tech.
But the execution was better.
Much better. Morant, back in '36, called it a veritable copy of the British Museum skull, but noted it was more anatomically refined. And the big thing's that separate jaw, carved from the same block of quartz without breaking it, that takes incredible skill.
One analyst called it perverted ingenuity, such as one would expect to find in a forger.
Exactly. It shows incredible technical mastery, but in service of deception.
So this fits the generational forgery idea perfectly.
Absolutely. The British Museum skull from the 1880s, that's the prototype, it proved the concept could sell. The Mitchell Hedges skull, probably made somewhere between 1900 and the 1930s.
Likely still in Idar Oberstein.
Most likely, yeah. It's the deluxe sequel. Made by a master carver who probably saw or studied the BM skull, figured out how to improve it, make it more dramatic with a separate jaw, and aim for an even higher price tag.
It's just amazing how resilient this myth is. Okay, so the science debunks them as ancient artifacts. The history shows they're 19th century fakes. The auction records kill the discovery stories. But that didn't kill the phenomenon, did it?
Not at all. In fact, in a weird way, the debunking kind of liberated them. If they couldn't be ancient human artifacts, well, then they must be something else. Mystical, maybe non-human.
Right, this is where history officially checks out and mythology takes over. And there's one key figure who really engineered this pivot, right? Frank Dorland.
Frank Dorland, yeah. He was an art restorer, and he had the Mitchell Hedges skull in his possession for a while in the 1970s for study. It was basically its modern PR agent.
He's the one who ditched the spooky Skull of Doom name.
Yeah, rebranded it as the much more inviting Skull of Knowledge or Skull of Divine Mystery. Smart marketing.
But his biggest move, the one that gave the myth a veneer of scientific credibility, involved Hewlett-Packard.
Ah, yes, the infamous HP tests. Dorland arranged for the skull to be examined at the Hewlett-Packard labs in California, which, sounds impressive. HP, serious science.
And this is where the single most persistent piece of pseudoscience comes from, the claim that became legendary.
This is the one. The myth that came out of HP, or rather the Dorland claimed came out of HP, was that the skull was carved against the natural axis of the quartz crystal.
Okay, and why is that supposedly significant?
The claim was that carving quartz against its natural growth axis is impossible. That even using modern diamond tools, trying to do that would just shatter the crystal into pieces.
Right, the impossible object theory. Proof of super advanced ancient tech or aliens or whatever.
Exactly. That became the core scientific justification for all the Atlantean, Lemurian, and ET origin stories.
But what did HP actually say? Was this claim based on their findings?
Not even remotely. This was a major misrepresentation, possibly delivered on Dorland's part. The objective reports show HP Labs only did basic tests. They confirmed it was made of a single piece of quartz and the jaw came from the same block. That's it.
So they didn't investigate how it was made? Or when?
Nope. No investigation into manufacturing methods, tool marks, dating, nothing like that. They just confirmed what it was made of, not how it was made or how old it was.
So the whole carved against the axis thing, the impossibility claim, where did that come from?
That was pure Dorland. His own speculation, his own interpretation, maybe wishful thinking. But he brilliantly managed to launder his personal theory through the scientific reputation of Hewlett-Packard.
Wow.
And that manufactured impossibility became the bedrock lie for the entire modern mystical interpretation. It basically set the skull free from boring old human history and launched it into the paranormal.
And once it was proven impossible for humans to make, well, the floodgates open for all sorts of paranormal claims, right? What kind of powers get attributed to these things now?
Oh, the list is long. Everything from personal wellness to cosmic communication. On the spiritual side, they supposedly activate psychic gifts, boost your energy field, make meditation way deeper. They're seen as power tools for the soul.
But the really popular theories today frame them as actual technology, just not human tech.
Yeah, the information storage idea is huge. That there's like organic hard drives, living libraries holding the entire history of the world, ancient secrets, ready to be unlocked when we're evolved enough.
The skull shape is just the casing for a crystal computer chip, basically.
That's the gist of it, yeah. And they're not just passive storage. People use them for divination, like crystal balls.
Getting visions, talking to spirits.
Exactly. Seeing the future, contacting spirit guides, angels, you name it. And then you get the quirkier claims, like the Mitchell Hedges skull, supposedly staying at a constant temperature no matter what.
Yeah.
Or even making nearby computer hard drives crash, as if its alien energy interferes with our primitive tech. It all feeds the mystique.
And this impossible object idea leads straight to the exotic origin theories. Atlantis. ETs.
Those are the big two. If humans couldn't make them, then maybe survivors from Atlantis or Lemuria did, with their lost super technology. Or, even more popular now, maybe extraterrestrials left them behind as gifts or data pods or something.
And the myth actually influences the creation of new fakes now.
Absolutely. You see modern carvers making and selling skulls explicitly designed to look like, gray alien skulls or other ET forms. The belief system is now dictating the design of the forgeries. It's a feedback loop.
Which brings us to the Mount Everest of crystal skull mythology, the legend of the 13 crystal skulls.
Ah, yes, the big one. This is really the central pillar of the modern New Age movement around the skulls. The core story is that there are 13 ancient, super powerful crystal skulls scattered around the world.
And what happens when they're all brought together?
That's the prophecy. When the 13 are reunited, it will trigger some massive shift, awaken a new era, or lay down a new consciousness grid for humanity, usually right before some predicted global catastrophe. Very dramatic stuff.
13. Is there a structure to that? Why 13?
It's highly symbolic. The common lore is that 12 of the skulls represent 12 inhabited planets, each holding different knowledge. And the 13th skull.
The master stuff.
Exactly. Often seen as the biggest or most powerful. Sometimes people claim it is the Mitchell Hedges skull. Yeah. That's the central hub, connecting the knowledge from the other 12 worlds, ready to download it into humanity.
And this whole prophecy, which sounds pretty modern, got a huge boost by tying it to the Maya calendar, right?
That was a stroke of genius, marketing-wise. They linked the urgent need to reunite the 13 skulls directly to the supposed end of the Maya calendar cycle on December 21st, 2012.
Ah, the 2012 phenomenon.
Exactly. It gave this modern manufactured prophecy instant ancient credibility and a terrifying deadline. Suddenly, finding the 13 skulls wasn't just a spiritual quest, it was about saving the world.
And this isn't just ancient lore being repeated. There are people actively promoting and expanding this mythology today.
Oh, absolutely. It's a living mythology. You have figures like Fr. Nicnoserino, who called himself the Dean of Crystal Skull Researchers. He owned a skull called Shana Ra and wrote books about their psychic powers and the 13 Skull Prophecy.
And then there's Joshua Shapiro, the Crystal Skull Explorer. He shows how the myths just keeps growing.
Shapiro is a perfect example of how this is like open source spirituality. He doesn't just repeat the 13 skull story, he adds to it. He claims to have visions of new ancient skulls, like the blue skull, and goes on quests to find them in Peru.
Wow.
He claims his own skull, Rosalita, performed a miracle by making an object materialize out of thin air. The community is constantly generating new stories, new quests, new evidence.
Okay, let's pull back to the academic view. Anthropology has a term for this kind of invention and projection of beliefs onto other cultures, doesn't it? Plastic shamanism.
That's the term, yeah. And it's the core academic critique here. The evidence is just overwhelming. Legends of crystal skulls with mystical powers do not figure in genuine Mesoamerican or other Native American mythologies, period.
So no ancient Mayan prophecies about 13 crystal skulls bringing enlightenment in 1012?
Absolutely none. Zero evidence. Nothing in actual indigenous Mayan belief supports any of it. The anthropologists are clear. The skull myths are modern inventions.
So plastic shamanism is basically when modern folks, often Westerners, make up spiritual beliefs or rituals.
And then falsely claim they come from indigenous cultures to give them legitimacy and an air of ancient wisdom they don't actually possess.
Right.
The crystal skull myth didn't emerge from Mayan elders. It emerged from figures like the Mitchell-Hedges family, from Frank Dorland's pseudoscience, from New Age literature in the 20th century. It's a modern Western fantasy projected onto ancient Mesoamerica. And yet,
Right.
despite the science, despite the history, despite the anthropology, this myth is arguably more powerful and widespread today than ever before. And the biggest reason, pop culture, film and TV especially.
We absolutely have to talk about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That 2008 movie wasn't just a fun adventure flick. It was like a global masterclass in Crystal Skull mythology.
It really was. It took all those fringe beliefs we've been talking about and blasted them onto multiplex screens worldwide. It perfectly synthesized the key elements of the modern myth.
Okay, break it down. What core myths did the movie embed in popular culture?
Okay, number one, the skull itself is telepathic. It communicates mentally.
Which is straight out of the Dorland Nosarino playbook of psychic amplification and spirit communication.
Exactly. Number two, the entire plot revolves around reuniting 13 crystal skeletons.
Not just skulls, but skeletons. But still, the magic number 13.
Right. They took the Legend of the 13 Skulls prophecy, expanded it visually, and made it the central quest of the movie. They didn't invent it. They borrowed it directly from the New Age narrative.
Okay, number 3. This is the big one.
The big one. When the 13 skeletons are reunited in the temple, they merge together to form a single, living, breathing alien being.
Boom. Extraterrestrial origin theory, confirmed by Hollywood.
Right there on screen. The journey from Bobon's fakes through Dorland's ET speculations ends with Indiana Jones meeting an actual alien made of crystal. It cemented the ET connection in the public mind like nothing else could.
It's incredible how a hoax becomes blockbuster truth. And the final point, what's the reward for reuniting them?
The reward is an overwhelming amount of knowledge being psychically blasted into the villain's brain until it explodes.
Ha! Right.
Which is a direct traumatization of the living library information storage theory. The skulls contain cosmic knowledge. So, yeah, the movie, while maybe intended as homage, basically served as a massive global endorsement of the entire crystal skull belief system.
And it's not just indie. The skulls keep popping up everywhere, keeping the mystery alive even if the facts are settled.
Constantly. You see them on those Mystery Hunter TV shows, always treating the Mitchell-Hedges skull as a genuine enigma. They show up in sci-fi like Stargate SG-1, fantasy settings.
Video games too, right?
Oh, yeah. Nancy Drew, Assassin's Creed, where they're literally called Mitchell-Hedges communicators. Yu-Gi-Oh! They're everywhere.
Yeah.
And it even spills into luxury goods and art.
Like Dan Aykroyd's vodka.
Crystal Head vodka.
Yeah.
Sold in a skull-shaped bottle, explicitly inspired by the legend. Trading on that mystique. Even high art like Damien Hirst's Diamond Skull, For the Love of God, plays with that same potent mix of mortality, crystal, and value.
Okay, so let's synthesize all this. For you listening right now, after this whole journey, what does it all mean? We've gone from 19th century German workshops to 21st century Hollywood aliens. What's the takeaway?
The story of the Crystal Skulls is really a story about the power of belief, and maybe the power of marketing. They started as fakes, ingeniously confected objects, probably made in Idar Oberstein from imported Brazilian quartz.
Sold by a cynical dealer, Bobon, who knew they were fakes, bought by fancy jewelers, not serious archaeologists.
Then they have this amazing, completely fabricated backstory from an adventurer, F.A. Mitchell-Hedges, and his daughter Anna, who lied about finding it in the jungle for decades.
And the final crucial twist was Frank Dorland rebranding it, laundering his impossible object theory through HP's reputation.
Which allowed the myth to escape history entirely and become a paranormal phenomenon, immune to facts.
So our final conclusion. The crystal skulls are definitively fake artifacts, no question, but they are absolutely real cultural objects. Their importance is historical, it's anthropological. They're mirrors.
Perfectly put. They show how much we crave mystery, how spiritual seeking works, how easily we can project our own ideas onto the past, especially onto other cultures. They started as blank quartz slates, and they reflect whatever we want them to be. Aztec god, alien computer, New Age icon, movie prop.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. That Mitchell-Hedges skull, the skull of doom, the one that launched 1,000 theories. F.A. Mitchell-Hedges bought it at Sotheby's in 1943 for just 400 pounds.
400 quid. Now think about the global mythology it spawned. The books, the workshops, the movies. That Indiana Jones film alone grossed nearly $800 million worldwide. The merchandise, the vodka, everything. Was that 400-pound purchase in 1943 possibly the single most profitable investment in the entire history of manufactured historical mystery?
A fake artifact generating a $1 billion global myth. It really shows you never underestimate the power of a good story, even a completely untrue one. Wow.
It's quite something.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, truly unpacking a hoax that just refuses to die. If you enjoyed this kind of exploration, digging into the history and the science behind these kinds of pervasive myths, please do follow and share our deep dives.
Yeah, we're out there on pretty much every platform you can think of. Just search for GL Deep Dives by Gorgorod Legends.
Thanks for joining us today as we peel back the layers. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.